$7.43. That's all it took to destroy a man's dignity in front of hundreds of people. Michael Carter had no idea that when he walked into that luxury car dealership on a cold Saturday night in January, his entire life would change forever. By midnight, the same people who humiliated him would be begging strangers for forgiveness. The video of what happened would be watched by millions. And the internet's response would teach everyone involved a lesson they would never forget. But here's what nobody saw coming. The man they treated like dirt held more power than any of them could have imagined. Not the kind of power that comes from money or status. Something far more dangerous. The power of dignity in the face of cruelty. And when the world found out what really happened that night, nothing would ever be the same again. This is the story of two groups of people whose paths crossed on one ordinary Saturday evening in Westport, Massachusetts. On one side, you have the employees of Riverside Auto Sales, a successful used car dealership where deals worth thousands of dollars are closed every single day. These are people who spend their days around luxury vehicles, high-end negotiations, and wealthy clients. They're used to a certain lifestyle. They're used to being in control. On the other side, you have Michael Carter, a 32-year-old pizza delivery driver for Giovanni's Pizza. A father of a newborn baby. A man working 2 jobs just to keep his family afloat. A man who depended on tips to make ends meet. 2 different worlds. 2 different realities. And on this particular night, those worlds would collide in the most unexpected way possible. What pushed successful business professionals to publicly humiliate a working man over less than $8? Why did they feel the need to record their cruelty? And what happened in the hours after that confrontation that would expose something deeper about power, respect, and the kind of justice that can only come from ordinary people standing together? These are the questions that millions of people around the world would soon be asking. Because what started as a simple pizza delivery would become one of the most talked about incidents of workplace bullying in modern history. And the ending? Nobody saw it coming. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Let me tell you about Michael Carter. Born and raised in Fall River, Massachusetts, Michael grew up understanding what it meant to work hard for everything you have. His father was a construction worker. His mother cleaned houses to help make ends meet. From the time he was 14 years old, Michael had been working. Mowing lawns in the summer. Shoveling snow in the winter. Whatever it took. He learned early that nothing in life comes easy, and that dignity isn't about how much money you make. It's about how you treat people and how you carry yourself through life's challenges. By the time Michael turned 32, he had built a modest but stable life. He married his high school sweetheart, Sarah, and they settled into a small apartment in New Bedford. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. When Sarah got pregnant, Michael knew he needed to step up. One job wasn't going to cut it anymore. During the day, he worked at a warehouse loading trucks. At night, he delivered pizzas for Giovanni's. The schedule was brutal. He'd leave for the warehouse at 6 in the morning, come home at 3 in the afternoon, grab a quick shower, and head to Giovanni's by 4. Most nights, he wouldn't get home until after midnight. But every time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he'd think about Sarah and their baby girl, Emma. 3 weeks old and already the light of his life. That's what kept him going. That's what made the long hours worth it. The people at Giovanni's Pizza loved Michael. He was always on time, always professional, always polite to customers no matter how they treated him. His manager, Tony Rodriguez, would later say that Michael was the kind of employee every business dreams of having. Reliable, hardworking, never complained. Even when customers were rude or forgot to tip, Michael never let it get to him. He understood that everyone was fighting their own battles. He understood that respect should be given freely, not earned through force or humiliation. But Michael had no idea that his values were about to be tested in the most public way imaginable. Now let's talk about Riverside Auto Sales. On the surface, it looked like any other successful used car dealership. Clean showroom. Rows of polished vehicles. A team of salespeople who knew how to close deals. The business had been running for over 15 years, building a reputation in the community as a place where you could get a good car at a fair price. But behind that professional facade, there was a culture problem. The kind of problem that festers when people start believing their own success makes them better than everyone else. When you spend your days surrounded by expensive cars and big commissions, it's easy to forget that the person delivering your food is working just as hard as you are. Maybe harder. On the evening of January 10th, 5 employees were working late at the dealership. There was Marcus Webb, the sales manager. Kevin Torres and Lisa Chen, 2 of the top salespeople. And David Price and Jennifer Mills, newer employees still trying to prove themselves. They just closed a big deal, a luxury SUV that brought in a significant commission. They were in a good mood. Celebrating. Somebody suggested ordering pizza. Marcus made the call to Giovanni's. Just over $42 for pizzas and drinks. Nothing unusual about the order. Nothing that would suggest this night would be any different from 1,000 other pizza deliveries. But it would be different. Very different. Because the choices these 5 people were about to make would change their lives forever, and not in the way they expected. If you're still watching right now, comment, "I'm still here." This story is about to take a turn no one expects. At 7:15 that Saturday evening, Michael Carter received his next delivery order from Tony. Giovanni's Pizza to Riverside Auto Sales. Total bill, $42.15. Michael knew the place. He'd delivered there a couple of times before. Never had any problems. He loaded the pizzas and drinks onto his bike, checked the address one more time, and headed out into the cold January night. The dealership was only about 10 minutes away. As he rode through the dark streets, his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Emma was crying again, probably hungry. He texted back quickly at a red light, promising he'd be home as soon as his shift ended. He needed to make good tips tonight. Formula was expensive, and they were running low. When Michael arrived at Riverside Auto Sales, the showroom lights were blazing. He could see people inside through the glass windows, laughing and talking. He parked his bike, grabbed the food, and walked in. The warmth hit him immediately after the cold ride. Marcus Webb was sitting behind the reception desk, barely looking up when Michael entered. Michael placed the pizzas on the counter and smiled. He always smiled. Even when customers didn't smile back. That's just who he was. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out money. 2 $20 bills and 2 $5 bills. $50 exactly. He handed them to Michael with barely a glance, then grabbed the pizzas and walked toward the back office where the others were waiting. Michael looked down at the money in his hand. The bill was $42.15. That meant the change was $7.85. Was this a tip? He'd been given exact bills that added up to 50. Usually when customers handed you round numbers like that without asking for change, it meant you could keep it. But Michael wanted to be sure. He called out to Marcus, who was already halfway across the showroom. "Hey, do you need change for this?" Marcus turned around, looked at the money, and waved his hand dismissively. "No, we're good. You can go." Michael's heart lifted a little. Almost $8. Not a huge tip, but it was something. Every dollar counted. He thanked Marcus, wished them a good evening, and headed back out into the cold. As he rode back to Giovanni's, he allowed himself a small moment of relief. Maybe tonight wouldn't be so bad after all. Maybe he'd make enough to pick up that formula on the way home. He had no idea what was waiting for him when he got back to the pizza shop. Michael walked through the door of Giovanni's at 7:40. The warmth and smell of fresh pizza greeted him like always. Tony was behind the counter, and the expression on his face made Michael's stomach drop. Something was wrong. Tony motioned him over, and Michael could see the tension in his manager's shoulders. "Michael, we got a call from that auto place. They're saying you took money that wasn't yours. They want you to go back and return the change." Michael felt his face flush. "What?" "Tony, I asked if they needed change. The guy told me no. He said we're good." Tony sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "I know, man. I believe you. But they're insisting you took it without permission. They want $7 and change back. I'm sorry, but you gotta take it back." The unfairness of it crashed over Michael like a wave. He'd have to ride all the way back there, waste his own gas money, his own time, to return money that was given to him freely. $7. They were making him do this over $7. But what choice did he have? He needed this job. Sarah was home with the baby, not working. They couldn't afford for him to lose this income over a dispute with a customer, no matter how ridiculous it was. So Michael reached into his pocket, pulled out the money, and counted out $7.85. He handed his own money to Tony, who put it in an envelope. Then Michael got back on his bike and rode back to Riverside Auto Sales for the second time that night. This time, the cold seemed to cut deeper. This time, there was no relief in his heart. Just a quiet anger that he kept buried beneath his usual calm demeanor. When Michael walked back into the dealership at 8:05, the atmosphere had changed. All 5 employees were now gathered in the reception area, and Michael could feel their eyes on him as he approached. The security camera mounted in the corner was recording everything. Marcus was still behind the desk, but now he was flanked by the others. Kevin Torres stood to his left, arms crossed. Lisa Chen was near the window, watching with a smirk on her face. David and Jennifer hung back slightly, but they were watching too. Everyone was watching. Michael approached the desk and placed the envelope with the money on the counter. He kept his voice even, professional, but he couldn't completely hide his frustration. "Here's your change. It just doesn't make sense why you'd hand me bills that you were just going to have me drive back here to give you back anyway." Marcus leaned back in his chair, that dismissive look still on his face. "I gave you everything they gave me so we could get the correct change. You should have asked before you left." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Michael felt his jaw tighten. "I did ask. You said we're good." Marcus shrugged. "Well, apparently there was a misunderstanding." They went back and forth like this for almost a minute, neither backing down. Michael trying to maintain his dignity while explaining his side. Marcus deflecting, treating him like he was the one being unreasonable. The other employees watched this exchange like it was entertainment. Finally, Michael realized this was pointless. These people had already decided he was in the wrong, and nothing he said would change their minds. So he said something that would later become famous. "You got your $7 back, so the world is right now." He turned to leave, eager to get away from this humiliating situation and back to his actual job. But they weren't done with him. As Michael headed toward the door, Lisa Chen called out, her voice dripping with mockery. "Out the door before I put my foot in your ass." The office erupted in laughter. Michael kept walking, his face burning. And then, just before he reached the exit, he heard Marcus on the phone, his voice loud enough to carry across the showroom. "Get me the owner and the manager of that pizza place on the phone. I want this guy's job. I want him fired." Michael's hand froze on the door handle. They weren't just humiliating him. They were trying to destroy his livelihood. Over $7. He pushed through the door and walked out into the night, his hands shaking. Not from fear. From rage he couldn't express. From the injustice of being treated like he was less than human because he delivered pizzas for a living. He got on his bike and rode away, not knowing that the security camera footage of this entire encounter would change everything. If this hooked you already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment because what happens next will absolutely shatter your expectations. Michael Carter arrived back at Giovanni's Pizza at 8:30 that night, emotionally drained but trying to hold it together. He had more deliveries to make. Bills to pay. A family to support. He couldn't afford to fall apart over one bad experience, no matter how humiliating it had been. Tony Rodriguez took one look at his face and pulled him aside. "You okay?" Michael nodded, but he wasn't okay. He told Tony what had happened. The laughing. The threats. The attempt to get him fired. Tony's expression darkened with anger, but not at Michael. At the people who had treated his employee this way. "This isn't the first time we've had problems with those people," Tony admitted. "But it's the last. If they call back, I'm telling them we're not delivering there anymore." That small gesture of support meant more to Michael than Tony probably knew. At least someone believed him. At least someone saw him as a human being worthy of respect. What Michael didn't know, what nobody at Giovanni's Pizza knew yet, was that someone at Riverside Auto Sales had made a catastrophic decision. One of the employees, it was never clear exactly who, had accessed the security camera footage of Michael's return to the dealership. They watched the video of the confrontation. And instead of feeling ashamed of how they'd treated another human being, they decided to post it online. They titled the video "Irate Pizza Driver" and uploaded it to YouTube, apparently thinking it would make Michael look bad. They thought people would see him as the problem. They thought the world would take their side. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. By Monday morning, the video had started to spread. It was shared on Reddit. Then Facebook. Then Twitter. But instead of turning against Michael Carter, viewers were horrified by what they saw. They saw a working man being humiliated over pocket change. They saw wealthy employees laughing at someone struggling to make a living. They saw the exact kind of bullying and classism that millions of people experience every day but rarely gets captured on camera. The comments sections exploded. "This is disgusting. Imagine treating someone like this over $7. These people should be ashamed of themselves." The video was re-uploaded to LiveLeak with a different title, this time accurately describing what was happening. And that's when it went viral. Within 48 hours, millions of people had watched the video. Riverside Auto Sales phones started ringing. But these weren't customers calling to buy cars. These were angry citizens demanding to know why their employees thought it was acceptable to treat a delivery driver with such cruelty. The dealership's Yelp page, which had previously shown mostly positive reviews, was now flooded with one-star ratings. Never buying a car from people who bully working families. Disgusted by how they treated that driver. This dealership should be shut down. The Google reviews told the same story. The dealership's Facebook page became a war zone. Someone even created a parody Facebook page called Riverside Auto Sales Douchebags that gained thousands of followers in a matter of hours. The owner of Riverside Auto Sales, Richard Harrison, who hadn't been present during the incident, found himself in the middle of a public relations nightmare. His business, which he'd spent 15 years building, was being destroyed in real time. The phones rang constantly with people threatening to protest outside the dealership. Local news stations started calling, asking for comments. Online forums dedicated entire threads to discussing what should happen to the employees involved. Harrison knew he had to act fast. But before he could figure out his next move, something even more remarkable began to happen. The internet wasn't just punishing the dealership. It was rallying around Michael Carter in a way nobody could have predicted. A woman in Chicago named Rebecca Martinez watched the video on her lunch break. She was a former waitress who had spent years in the service industry, and the sight of Michael's quiet dignity in the face of such humiliation moved her to tears. She thought about all the times she'd been treated poorly by customers. All the times she'd swallowed her pride and smiled through insults because she needed the job. She thought about how Michael had kept his composure even when those people were laughing at him, threatening his livelihood. And she decided she had to do something. Rebecca found Giovanni's Pizza online and called them. She asked for the name of the delivery driver in the video. Tony Rodriguez was initially suspicious. They'd been getting strange calls all day, but Rebecca explained what she wanted to do. "I want to set up a fundraiser for him. To replace the tip he should have gotten and to show him that not everyone in this world is cruel." Tony gave her Michael's name, and Rebecca immediately set up a GoFundMe page. She titled it "Get Michael His Tip Money," and wrote a simple description explaining what had happened and asking people to donate. She suggested people donate in $7 increments, the exact amount Michael had been forced to return. What happened next shocked everyone. Within the first hour, the fundraiser had raised over $1,000. By that evening, it had crossed $5,000. People weren't just donating $7. They were donating $20, $50, even $100. Along with their donations, they left messages. "Thank you for keeping your dignity. You handled that better than I would have. This is for all the delivery drivers and service workers who get treated like they don't matter." The messages came from across the country. From people who had been in Michael's shoes. From people who had never worked in the service industry but recognized injustice when they saw it. By Tuesday night, less than 72 hours after the video went viral, Rebecca's fundraiser had raised over $11,000. Michael Carter, who had been humiliated over $7.85, was now looking at more money than he made in 6 months of delivering pizzas. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about what the money represented. Thousands of strangers had seen his pain, recognized his humanity, and decided to do something about it. In a world that often feels cold and indifferent, this was proof that goodness still existed. That dignity still mattered. That people still cared about standing up for what was right. Michael would later say that reading those messages made him cry harder than he'd cried since Emma was born. Not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. He'd felt so alone standing in that dealership, surrounded by people who saw him as beneath them. Now he knew he wasn't alone at all. While Michael Carter's life was being transformed by the kindness of strangers, Riverside Auto Sales was facing a reckoning. Owner Richard Harrison knew he had to respond publicly, and he had to do it quickly. On Wednesday morning, he released a statement through the dealership's social media accounts. The statement was carefully worded, but the message was clear. Harrison apologized on behalf of his business for the treatment Michael had received. He stated that the behavior captured in the video did not reflect the values of Riverside Auto Sales. And then he announced that Lisa Chen, the employee who had threatened to put her foot in Michael's ass, had been immediately terminated. Her employment was over, effective immediately. The statement also clarified that Marcus Webb was not technically an employee of the dealership but rather a contractor who would no longer be working with the business. The other employees involved would face disciplinary action. But the statement created as many questions as it answered. Who had uploaded the security camera footage to the internet? Harrison claimed it wasn't done by any current employee and that whoever accessed that footage had no authorization to share it publicly. This raised an interesting question. If the employees hadn't posted the video trying to shame Michael, then who did? Had someone at the dealership realized how wrong the situation was and leaked the footage to expose the behavior? Or was this simply damage control, with Harrison trying to deflect responsibility? The internet detectives went to work, analyzing the timeline, but the truth never became completely clear. What was clear was that the video's release, regardless of who did it, had set off a chain of events that nobody could have anticipated. The local news stations picked up the story. Reporters showed up at both Giovanni's Pizza and Riverside Auto Sales, wanting interviews. Michael, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the support, agreed to speak with one local station. He sat in his small living room, baby Emma in Sarah's arms in the background, and talked about what it felt like to be treated like he didn't matter. "I'm just a regular guy trying to take care of my family," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I work hard. I try to be respectful to everyone I meet. To have people laugh at me, threaten my job, make me feel like I'm less than them just because I deliver pizzas, that hurt. That hurt a lot." The interviewer asked him about the fundraiser, about the $11,000 that had been raised. Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe how many people cared. I felt so alone in that moment. And now I know I wasn't alone at all. People saw what happened and decided to help. That means everything to me. If you're still here, subscribe, because stories like this only work when people stay." The interview aired that evening and was immediately shared across social media. If the video of the confrontation had made people angry, Michael's interview made them heartbroken and even more determined to support him. The fundraiser jumped to $13,000. Then $15,000. Then $17,000. People who had never met Michael Carter, who lived thousands of miles away, were moved by his story. They saw in him a reflection of their own struggles. Their own experiences of being dismissed or disrespected because of their job or their income level. And they wanted him to know that his dignity mattered. That his hard work mattered. That he mattered. Meanwhile, Lisa Chen and Marcus Webb, the two most vocal participants in the confrontation, were dealing with consequences of their own. Lisa lost her job, which meant losing her income and her health insurance. She gave a public apology, claiming she felt terrible about what had happened and that her behavior was inexcusable. But the internet wasn't particularly forgiving. Her social media accounts, once public, were now set to private after being flooded with angry messages. Marcus, who had demanded Michael be fired, found himself persona non grata in the local business community. Other dealerships wanted nothing to do with him. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He'd tried to destroy Michael's livelihood, and in the process, he'd damaged his own. As for the other employees who had stood by laughing, they kept their jobs but faced public shame. Their names were public. Their faces were in the video. And the internet has a long memory. Richard Harrison, trying to salvage what was left of his business's reputation, made another move. He and his son drove to Giovanni's Pizza to apologize in person to Michael and the management. Tony Rodriguez met with them, along with Michael. Harrison's apology seemed genuine. He explained that he was horrified when he saw the video, that this wasn't how he ran his business, that he took full responsibility for the culture that had allowed this behavior. He offered Michael a cash donation from the dealership as an additional apology. Michael accepted, though friends would later say he didn't really care about the dealership's money. What mattered more was that Harrison looked him in the eye and acknowledged that what happened was wrong. That Michael deserved better. That simple act of recognition, of being seen as a human being worthy of respect, meant more than any amount of money. Here's what nobody expected. The story didn't end with Michael getting his money and the dealership employees being punished. There was one more twist. One more revelation that would reframe everything. About a week after the video went viral, Tony Rodriguez at Giovanni's Pizza received a strange phone call. It was from a regular customer, someone who'd been ordering from them for years. The customer wanted Tony to know something important. Riverside Auto Sales, the dealership at the center of this controversy, had actually been dealing with serious financial problems for months. They were struggling. Behind the professional facade, behind the expensive cars in the showroom, the business was barely staying afloat. The big sale they'd celebrated that Saturday night, the one that had put them in such a good mood before Michael arrived, was one of the few bright spots in an otherwise terrible quarter. This information started circulating online, and suddenly the incident took on new dimensions. These weren't arrogant wealthy people punching down at a poor pizza driver just for fun. They were stressed, struggling business people who'd taken out their financial anxieties and insecurities on someone they perceived as even more vulnerable than themselves. It didn't excuse their behavior. Nothing could excuse treating another human being with such cruelty. But it explained it in a way that was almost more disturbing. They'd hurt Michael not because they were rich and powerful, but because they were afraid and desperate and needed someone to feel superior to, even if just for a moment. They'd chosen the easiest target. A delivery driver who couldn't fight back without risking his job. And in doing so, they'd revealed something fundamental about how power and insecurity can turn ordinary people cruel. The revelation added a tragic layer to the story. Lisa Chen, the woman who'd been fired, later admitted in a local interview that she'd been struggling with her own financial problems. Her mother was sick. Medical bills were piling up. She'd been working extra hours trying to keep up, and on that Saturday night, she'd been exhausted and stressed and looking for any reason to feel like she had some control over her life. Taking it out on Michael had been wrong. She knew that now. She'd known it even then. In some part of her brain she'd refused to listen to. But in that moment, making someone else feel small had made her feel bigger. And now she'd lost everything. Her job. Her reputation. The respect of her community. All because she'd chosen cruelty over compassion. All because she'd forgotten that the person delivering her pizza was a human being with his own struggles, his own pain, his own right to dignity. Marcus Webb never gave an interview, but people who knew him said he'd been genuinely shocked by the backlash. In his mind, he'd just been a customer rightfully complaining about poor service. He'd convinced himself that Michael had tried to steal from them, that the video would vindicate his position. The fact that the entire world saw it differently, that millions of people looked at the same footage and saw him as the villain, had shaken him. He'd lost contracts. Lost opportunities. And perhaps most importantly, he'd lost the ability to see himself as a good person. When you become the villain in a viral video watched by millions, when strangers across the world know your face as the face of workplace bullying and class-based cruelty, that changes you. Whether it changes you for better or worse depends on whether you're willing to actually learn from the experience. But here's the real final twist, the part that nobody saw coming and that changes the entire meaning of this story. Michael Carter took that money, all $17,000 that had been raised by the end of the fundraiser, and he didn't just use it to pay bills or buy formula for Emma. He did those things, yes. But he also did something that shocked even Rebecca Martinez, the woman who'd started the fundraiser. Michael used part of the money to start a small fund. A dignity fund, he called it. It was designed to help other service workers who faced similar situations. Delivery drivers who got fired unfairly. Wait staff who lost tips they'd earned. Workers in the service industry who found themselves targeted by employers or customers and had no resources to fight back. He partnered with local workers' rights organizations. He created a system where service workers could apply for small grants to help them through tough times when they'd been treated unfairly. The pizza driver who'd been humiliated over $7 became an advocate for the dignity of all workers. He used his pain, his viral moment, to create something lasting. Something meaningful. When reporters asked him why he didn't just keep the money for himself, why he felt compelled to help others when he had his own family to support, Michael gave an answer that would be quoted in articles and social media posts for years afterward. What happened to me wasn't special. It happens every day to people all across this country. Workers get treated like they don't matter because they're not rich or powerful. They get humiliated and disrespected and they can't fight back because they need their jobs. I was lucky. People saw what happened to me and they cared. They helped me. But what about all the people who suffer in silence? What about all the delivery drivers and waiters and cashiers who get treated like garbage every single day and nobody's there to stand up for them? If I just took this money and forgot about them, I'd be doing the same thing those dealership employees did. I'd be saying their dignity doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. Every worker's dignity matters. So what do you think really changed that night? Was it just about one pizza driver getting justice? Or was it about something bigger? Something about how we treat each other, especially across lines of class and power? Michael Carter wasn't a hero because he kept his cool when he was being humiliated. He was a hero because he turned his pain into purpose. Because he refused to let bitterness consume him. Because he saw an opportunity to help others and he took it, even when he could have just focused on his own family. And what about the employees at Riverside Auto Sales? Were they villains? Or were they just ordinary people who made terrible choices under stress and pressure? Does understanding why someone does something cruel make it any less cruel? These are the questions this story forces us to ask. Think about your own life. Have you ever been in Michael's position? Have you ever been dismissed or disrespected because of your job, your income, the way you look, or where you come from? How did it feel? And here's the harder question, Have you ever been in the position of those dealership employees? Have you ever taken out your stress or insecurity on someone who couldn't fight back? Have you ever treated someone in the service industry like they were less important than you? These aren't comfortable questions. But they're necessary ones. Because the truth is, most of us have been on both sides of this equation at different points in our lives. Most of us have been hurt, and most of us have hurt others. The question is what we do with that knowledge. Do we use it to become more compassionate? Or do we just keep repeating the same patterns? The dealership eventually recovered, though it took years. They implemented mandatory training on workplace conduct and customer service. They changed their culture from the top down. Richard Harrison would later say that the incident, as painful as it was, forced him to confront problems in his business that he'd been ignoring for too long. Lisa Chen, the fired employee, moved to another state and started over. She became a volunteer at a food bank, working directly with people experiencing homelessness and poverty. Friends say the experience genuinely changed her, made her more aware of her own privilege and more committed to treating everyone with respect. Whether that's enough to make up for what she did is not for me to decide. That's between her and her conscience. Marcus Webb faded from public view, and nobody knows for certain what happened to him or whether he learned anything from being at the center of such a massive public backlash. Michael Carter still lives in Massachusetts with his wife Sarah and daughter Emma, who's now several years old. He left the pizza delivery business a year after the incident, using some of the fundraiser money to get training in HVAC repair. He makes a decent living now, enough that Sarah could stay home with Emma when she was young, and is now working part-time doing what she loves, graphic design. The Dignity Fund he started has helped over 200 service workers in the past few years, providing small grants and legal support to people who face discrimination or unfair treatment at work. Michael doesn't talk about the video much anymore. It was the worst night of his life in some ways, and in other ways, it was the night that changed everything for the better. That's the complicated truth of viral moments. They can destroy you, or they can transform you. The difference often comes down to how you respond. Michael chose transformation. He chose to turn his humiliation into hope for others. And that choice matters. Here's what I want you to take away from this story. Dignity isn't something you can buy. It isn't something that comes from your job title or your bank account balance. Dignity is inherent in being human. Every person delivering your food, ringing up your groceries, cleaning your office, fixing your car, teaching your children, caring for your elderly parents, every single person you interact with in the service economy deserves to be treated with respect. Not because they've earned it through their position in society, but because they're human beings doing honest work to take care of themselves and their families. The $7 those employees fought over wasn't really about $7. It was about power. About feeling superior. About using someone else's vulnerability to prop up their own fragile egos. And when they did that, when they chose to humiliate rather than show grace, they set off a chain reaction they never could have predicted. Sometimes the people we overlook hold the power to change everything. Not because they have money or status, but because they have something more powerful. They have their dignity. They have their humanity. And when millions of people witness that dignity under attack, when they see someone maintaining their composure and their values even in the face of cruelty, something shifts. The power dynamic flips. The person who seemed weak becomes strong. The people who seemed powerful become small. That's what happened that Saturday night in January. A pizza delivery driver making minimum wage plus tip stood in a car dealership and refused to surrender his dignity. And the world noticed. The world cared. And the world responded with a force that nobody, least of all those dealership employees, saw coming. That's the power of dignity. That's the power of treating people right. And that's a lesson worth remembering every single day of our lives. What's your take on this story? Do you think the employees at Riverside Auto Sales deserved the backlash they received? Was it too harsh? Not harsh enough? And what about Michael? Would you have handled the situation the same way? Would you have started that dignity fund, or would you have kept the money for your family? These are questions worth thinking about. Comment below. I read every single one. And if you thought this story was powerful, wait until you hear what happened in our next case. It's about a homeless veteran who was kicked out of a restaurant and what the owner discovered about him 3 days later. That story will leave you speechless. My mum said I can't hit 1,000 subscribers before today ends. Subscribe and let's prove her wrong. Sometimes the people we overlook hold the power to change everything. Remember that. Remember Michael Carter. Remember that $7.85 can teach us more about humanity than 1,000 business seminars. Remember that how we treat the most vulnerable among us reveals who we really are. And remember that in a world that often feels cruel and indifferent, kindness is still the most powerful force we have. Use it. Share it. And never, ever forget that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Treat them accordingly. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.